The Galactic Senate chambers had never been designed to accommodate a human. The crystalline seats were too tall, the atmospheric processors too acidic, and the translation matrices too sophisticated for what most species considered humanity's primitive language. Yet there sat Dr. Elena Vasquez, librarian from Earth's University of Cairo, adjusting her worn cardigan and clutching a simple paper notebook. The 12-foot-tall Zephyrian Senator Krixtal loomed over her, his forearms gesticulating wildly as bioluminescent patterns flashed across his translucent skin. This creature requests to address the Senate, a keeper of dead information from a species barely past nuclear fission? Murmurs rippled through the vast chamber. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia, their caste system as rigid as the neutronium pillars supporting their capital world. Humans were Tier 9 beings, barely above livestock in their classification. They were permitted to exist as long as they remained in their designated systems, contributing raw materials and staying quiet. Elena stood, her movements deliberate and calm. At 5'4", she was dwarfed by every other being present, yet something in her posture commanded attention. The chamber gradually fell silent. "Honored beings," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. "I come not as a petitioner but as a witness to truth." Senator Vexmore of the Crystalline Dominion clicked his mandibles dismissively. Truth? What truth? Could a Tier 9 species possibly possess that we have not catalogued, analyzed, and filed away? Elena opened her notebook, actual paper, bound with thread, ancient by galactic standards. The truth about the Andorian massacre. The silence that followed was absolute. Every sensor in the chamber focused on the small human woman. The Andorian massacre was the foundational myth of the hegemony's authority, a glorious victory that had established their right to rule 3,000 years ago. "Senator Krixtal," Elena said, turning to address the Zephyrian directly, "your people's oral histories speak of the day the stars wept crystal tears. I believe you know what that refers to." Krixtal's bioluminescence flickered with what could only be described as fear. "Those are children's stories, folklore." Senator Morthak of the Hive Collective, Elena continued, flipping through her notebook, "your genetic memory banks contain fragments of a day when the singing stopped across 6 systems. And you, Senator Vexmore, your people's crystalline records show a resonance pattern that translates roughly to the silencing. The hegemony's prime chancellor, a being of pure energy contained within a mechanical shell, finally spoke. His voice resonated with the authority of ages. "You dare suggest that our foundational victory was something else?" Elena smiled, a gesture that translated poorly but somehow conveyed both sadness and determination. "I don't suggest anything. I simply read." She began to recite, her voice steady and clear. "From the oral histories of the Zephyrians, recorded by Keeper Thixnall before the memory purges, they came without warning to our worlds, not as conquerors, but as refugees. The Andorians fleeing something terrible beyond the rim. We welcomed them, as did the crystallines, the hive, even the energy beings of Nexus Prime. For 100 cycles, we lived in harmony." Senator Krixtal was now flashing rapid patterns of distress. "Stop this immediately," Elena continued, turning pages. From the crystalline resonance archives thought to be corrupted but actually just translated incorrectly. The hegemony came not as liberators but as exterminators. They said the Andorians carried a plague of ideas, the concept that hierarchy was not natural law but artificial construct. They said these ideas would spread, would corrupt the proper order. The chamber erupted. Senators were shouting in languages the translation matrix struggled to parse. Security drones moved into position, but the Prime Chancellor held up one metallic appendage. "Continue," he said quietly. "The Andorians weren't conquerors or invaders," Elena said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "They were teachers. They'd developed beyond the need for rigid hierarchy, beyond the concept that some beings were inherently worth more than others, and that terrified those who built their power on such concepts." She closed the notebook, and looked directly at the Prime Chancellor. The hegemony didn't defeat a conquering force. They committed genocide to preserve their control. 6 billion Andorians and their allied species, dead to maintain the lie that some beings are naturally superior to others. "These are the fantasies of a Tier 9 mind," Vexmore screeched. "Even if such records existed, they prove nothing." Elena reached into her cardigan and withdrew a small, crystalline object. "This was given to my university by a Zephyrian defector 50 years ago. We thought it was simply a decorative piece until I learned to read resonance patterns. It's an Andorian memory crystal." The chamber fell silent again. "It contains the complete cultural archives of their civilization. Their art, their philosophy, their social structures, everything the hegemony tried to erase, including detailed records of their final days." The Prime Chancellor's energy form flickered. "Impossible. All Andorian artifacts were destroyed." "You destroyed the planets, the cities, the people," Elena said softly. "But information, true information, has a way of surviving. It hides in oral traditions disguised as folklore. It preserved itself in genetic memories labeled as junk data. It crystallizes in resonance patterns dismissed as natural phenomena." She stood taller, her small frame somehow filling the vast space. "My species may be Tier 9 in your classification. We may be primitive by your standards, but we have one thing you clearly lack: we know how to preserve truth." The silence stretched for long moments. Then, one by one, non-hegemony senators began to stand. First Krixtal, his patterns now showing what could only be courage. Then delegates from a dozen worlds, then 100. Elena looked around the chamber, then focused on the Prime Chancellor one final time. "The vote for humanity's elevation to Tier 1 status isn't really about us, is it? It's about whether this Senate will continue to be built on lies or finally embrace the truth. The revolution didn't happen in a day. But historians would mark this moment, when a human librarian with a paper notebook and an unshakable belief in the power of preserved truth, as the beginning of the end for the hegemony's stranglehold on the galaxy. Sometimes the mightiest weapons aren't plasma cannons or reality bombs. Sometimes they're simply words, carefully preserved and spoken, at exactly the right moment by someone brave enough to tell the truth."